Amid the Doklam standoff, the provocations by China have now stooped to a new low. China has issued a fresh threat saying, what would India do if China enters Kashmir, Uttarakhand or the Kalapani region?
China's most provocative threat to India so far. Rubbishing all possibility of dialogue, China has openly threatened to send its troops into Uttarakhand and Kashmir, specifically invoking the Kalapani area under dispute between India and Nepal. Earlier speaking through state-owned media, the Chinese government is now bearing its official fangs. A senior official in the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Wang Lini, has made it clear that the price of India's resilience at Doklam will be a Chinese border intrusion in another area. In a sign that there is nothing but war on China's mind, the official, sanctioned to speak by Beijing's highest authorities, has dared to specifically name a tri-junction as a possible target for the next standoff between the two countries. China's non-stop campaign of threat also includes fresh military exercises by the Chinese Army's serious commandos. As India fortifies with a calm demeanor of unshakability, China has made it clear that its belligerence knows no bounds. Bureau Report, India Today.
Now, in the midst of this shrill aggression, the editor of the Global Times has put out a video. Now, this is important because Global Times is a state-run tabloid. The editor, virtually a government spokesperson of sorts. In this video, he's provoking India, he's taunting India. What's essentially happening is China is now resorting to word war. This is not a real war. This is psychological operations meant to put pressure on the Indian government. The good thing, though, is that the Modi government is holding firm and staring the dragon right back in the eye.
For nearly 2 months now, this is the only language China has spoken. The language of war, firepower and intimidation. As the tense standoff in Doklam nears the 60-day mark, China's shocking warmongering and belligerence has stunned the world, even as India keeps its cool and prepares for an eventuality. But things have just escalated to another level altogether. This man on your screen is the editor-in-chief of China's state-owned Global Times newspaper. And after weeks of shamefully publishing vicious threats to India, this man has now decided to do it himself, directly into a camera and in English. What you have just heard from this man's smiling face is the first Chinese government-sanctioned threat of military action against India if our troops do not vacate from Bhutan's Doklam plateau. He doesn't stop there. This man then goes on to insult the Indian government and Indian citizens. And finally, the ultimate use of history to threaten a devastating invasion by the Chinese. Every single one of this Chinese editor's words delivered with an insidious smile, as though war is a laughing matter. The ironic threat issued with politeness of a drawing room diplomat. As the tense Doklam standoff marches towards its 2-month mark and no sign of a climb down, it doesn't appear that China has anything but war on its mind anymore. The question is, who will make the next move? With Anand Krishnan in Beijing, Bureau Report, India Today.
The word wars are on in full earnest. You know, you heard the smirk with which the editor said, what a curious country, and that really is a statement that applies well to China as well. What do we make of this latest verbal salvo being fired? Joining us on this broadcast, Sushant Sareen. He's the Executive Director of the South Asian Institute for Strategic Affairs. Sushant Sareen is with us. We've got also Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain. I want to go across. Alok Bansal is with us, Sushant Sareen and Lieutenant General Ata Hasnain. Welcome to all our guests. I want to go across to General Ata Hasnain first. General Hasnain, the editor of Global Times putting out this video. Now, if video blogging of this sort were common in Beijing, then one would understand that this is par for the course. But this video blog isn't common. And also he's holding out a direct threat. The foreign ministry is speaking the same language. What are you looking at these multiple latest provocations, sir?
Rahul, firstly, I would not trivialize whatever is being put out by China. At the same time, I would also remind our viewers that this is China's old concept. The war without means of going to battle. So, this kind of a rhetoric is not unknown with China. It's been on for the last 8 weeks and is getting worse. The only problem that I see in this entire thing is that the more China threatens, the more it intimidates, it is actually tying itself down in its options. Because ultimately, as what Mrs. Sushma Swaraj gave out in Parliament, it is diplomacy which will ultimately rule, which will ultimately resolve these issues. But the way the Chinese have chosen to go about this rhetoric only seems to confirm that they have decided and tied themselves down to a physical action against India. And the options for that are many if they wish to do it. They have threatened action at Doklam itself. They have threatened action in the area of the Tri-Junction in Uttarakhand. They have also now included Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. But I think the stare down which they are trying to do against us, they do not realize that India is also a mature country with a mature security policy, a government in place which is stable, and it has got all the means available to it to ensure that it can stare down China in this entire situation.
Alok Bansal, what are you making of this latest verbal salvo? It's, gone beyond a point where you could just dismiss this as a mere verbal onslaught. Now they're talking about war. They're talking about war again and again. Even the foreign ministry is talking about evicting the Indians who are stationed in Doklam. How seriously are you taking these latest threats? What do you make of this Global Times editor's video?
See, there are 2-3 things which we must understand. I think what Chinese are resorting to is psychological ops. We must also understand that Chinese Communist Party's party congress is due later next month or next to next month, and this has put enormous pressure on Xi Jinping, who does not want to be seen as a weakling, and as a result the sections of government are actually churning out this hostile, aggressive propaganda. Because Xi Jinping already has consolidated power and is far more powerful than his 2 predecessors, and he is probably hoping for 3rd term and all, and he is trying to consolidate power within the Communist Party. He wants to be seen as aggressive. As far as Global Times is concerned, it has been a newspaper which has been consistently hawkish. And I think what the Chinese need to understand that 2017 is not 1962, and Chinese have actually never won a war after 1950s. In fact, 62 cannot be called a war. But after 62, they faced a stunning defeat in 79 when they tried similar tactics against Vietnam. And I think Chinese realize this, and I feel that within a month or two, when the winter sets in, and I think the party congress is over,
saying don't dismiss the Chinese threat of a physical attack. Alok Bansal saying no need to take it too seriously. This is psychological operation. Sushant Sareen, where do you stand? Is it correct to suggest that Beijing is upping the ante to an extent where Xi Jinping, ahead of this big internal congress, is left with virtually no option but to show some action on the ground by forcibly trying to evict India, even if that leads to war? Are they upping the stakes too much where you have no exit route left? Sushant.
No, I'm not entirely convinced of that point, and I'll tell you the reason why. If the Chinese had not made such a big song and dance the way, the kind of rhetoric they've gone in for, this would not even have really figured. It would have been seen as just another one of those border tangles which India and China, routinely have. But by taking the pitch to a level that they have, and I think General Hasnain has a point out there, they're actually painting themselves in a corner, because once you take the rhetoric to that tipping point, either you get into some kind of a shooting match, which could go either way, which could then jeopardize, this great Tajposhi that you have planned for yourself in October, or else, you have to climb down, which again impacts upon you. So I think that's, and he doesn't need to do that to actually, sweep the party congress and anoint himself.
I have a difference of opinion here, Sushant Sareen, with respect.
So I'm not
You're saying that the Tajposhi, but the coronation for Xi Jinping has already happened. He's already by far the most powerful man, General Hasnain, in China, and has been in comparison to the last several presidents. So there is no Tajposhi of sorts. But do you sense, General Hasnain, that they are upping the ante to an extent
Rahul,
where you've got Xi Jinping left with virtually no option? You almost made it seem that war is the only option, and therefore there must be some physical assault, otherwise Beijing has no exit diplomatic route left.
That's exactly the point, Rahul, that I was focusing on, emphasizing on. That I think there's been a combination of factors which has actually contributed to this. One of the factors is the political issue, no doubt, of Xi Jinping's whole intent of looking at the 19th Congress of the Communist Party and trying to empower himself even beyond the kind of powers that he has got today. But there are other issues involved. The demonstrations which they have done in the South China Sea, they wish now to actually do it in the continental domain. They also want to trivialize the kind of relationship which is developing between the United States, India and Japan, the Malabar exercise, which was a demonstration in the near past. All these put together has brought China to a state where they wish to place India in its place, so to say. And I think they started this with an intent of only actually taking it up to a point. But somehow, India's response, the very quiet response from India, and a very mature response, may I say, has actually created a problem for China. Because as
Sareen, do you agree that China thought if you unleash psychological operations, word war, put pressure on the Indian government, India will buckle? Instead, the Modi government is holding firm, staring the dragon back. That now puts the Chinese government in a position where there's a check situation happening and they don't know what move to make next.
That is precisely the point I'm making. So I'm not linking it up entirely with China's domestic politics. I'm saying that that might have some minor impact on this, but that's not the major reason. The other thing, Rahul, we have to be very careful about is that, you don't enter into a war without only on the basis of rhetoric. There has to be some mobilization on the ground, some really threatening moves made on the ground, which then lead you to believe that yes, a shooting match or some kind of a major skirmish is really in the offing. Until recently, we haven't heard of any such major mobilization from the Chinese side, which would lead you to believe that there could be some kind of hostilities breaking out. And yes, I do think that the Chinese have been in this habit of, where else in the entire neighborhood of China have hundreds of articles of such belligerence been written and the adversary not buckled under. I think this is the first instance that the Chinese have been screaming and shouting.
Important point you make, Sushant Sareen, because General Hasnain,
goon Barala.
We've got some Chinese media reporting that there's been a massive build-up on the Tibetan side opposite the Doklam plateau. But the fact is, India now has, through NTRO satellite imagery, which demonstrates there actually hasn't been much of a build-up on the Chinese side. Now these things, it's not as if the great Himalayan ranges lie between us and China. It does, but we've now got the capacity to see beyond. There's been no build-up there. So a lot of this is just posturing. A lot of this is, as Alok Bansal says, psychological operations.
See, there is
no doubt about it,
that
Rahul. This is
there has not been
extreme
any
psychological
massive
operation. This is
mobilization on the
extreme posturing.
Go on, sir.
can I
Yes,
take on?
General Hasnain,
The
you
point
must.
which I'm trying to make is that there's no doubt about it. There's been an extreme provocation as far as psychological warfare is concerned, and there is nothing to back it up, as you very correctly say, that there isn't any kind of a mobilization. But I think the way it is progressing, ultimately.
You know, what I want to do now is show our viewers what the Indian government is doing in the meanwhile, because the one good thing to come out of this is that the Indian army is being given extra budgets, more emergency financial powers to buy the ammunition, the weapon systems which it desperately needs. Usually the defense acquisition process is a very long and cumbersome, time-consuming process, but that's being speeded up. Sudhir Ranjan Sen with this story.
Incursion into foreign territory, followed by provocations and threatening military drills. Despite India's appeals for peaceful resolution of the Doklam plateau issue, India is preparing for the worst. Boosting its war chest, the Ministry of Defence has sought an additional grant of 20,000 crore rupees. This is to procure weapons and ammunition on an emergency basis.
I don't know if this 20,000 has a timeline, this is allocated only for the current year. But if you take the overall picture, I think it's an underkill, not overkill. The requirement is vast.
The previous governments, particularly UPA, for the full 10 years virtually procured nothing at all, went in for no arms or any fresh inductions. The Babus in the Defence Ministry understood nothing as far as defence is concerned.
The step, however, seems belated. In its recent report, the Controller and Auditor General of India pointed out that ammunition stores would run out after 10 days of intense war. A shocking report considering India faces a threat both from the east and the west.
West side, it is a very active border. It's like a no war, no peace situation. Against China, the border, nearly 4,000 kilometers long, is undefined, undemarcated. So there are disputes at various places. We already have a very tension-full face-off going on in Doklam Plateau now. So country has to be prepared to cater for a problem on both fronts.
So is the Defence Ministry's request for release of emergency funds enough?
To speed up the acquisition, they have decentralized this requirement that in an emergency, the Vice Chief has the power to spend money up to so much, 40,000 crore I think is the figure mentioned, where it can be procured. Ammunition may be available off the shelf, particularly of the requirement that the army has small arms basically.
40,000 crore more has been released to the Vice Chief, the Army staff, to bypass all the laid down procedures so as to quickly make up the hollowness. That too, I said 1,60,000 crores is the hollowness in the army itself. So another 20,000 crores is. So all this will really make up about 50% of the requirement of the army.
The government's move, though late, is a step in the right direction. But much more may need to be done if India truly must get ready for war on 2.5 fronts. With Sudhir Ranjan Sen and Parveena Purkayastha, Bureau Report, India Today.
So you've got the Vice Chief being given emergency financial powers. You've also got 20,000 crore rupees being sanctioned. Alok Bansal, will this enable India to stockpile its ammunition? God forbid, if there were to be an escalation with China, do you think it will just take way too much time and it's impossible for a weapon purchase to be made with any real great speed?
See, while it will take longer for weapon purchases, but I think what is required is, I think, ammunition, and I think it's adequate. And as I said, there has been no major mobilization on Chinese side, so it is at this juncture presumptuous. I think we are more than prepared to deal with any Chinese aggression at this stage. And I think as the build-up increases on Chinese side, if at all it increases, we would take further steps. But at the moment, I think this amount should meet any emergency requirements of ammunition. Weapon systems, of course, have a system way of taking longer. But as I said, I have had the good fortune or bad fortune of visiting China after this Doklam standoff. It's more a problem of perceptions. There are different perceptions across the borders, and people there also are equally worried about war. There are, of course, hawks like Global Times, etc., who are propagating and whipping up statements one after the other. But as I said, there is a perception there. In fact, Malabar exercise was given headlines virtually every day as long as that exercise was going on. There are fears even there. Certain people fear. But as I said, these are perceptions, and this problem can only be resolved by diplomacy.
Is it enough for ammunition?
And I think diplomacy
a CAG report in this session said that we've got ammunition only for a 10-day conflict. 20,000 crore rupees, is it enough? Will it speed up what the Army, Navy, Air Force need? Sushant Sareen?
Rahul, sorry, I thought you were directing that to General Hasnain, but let me say my bit on this. See, I don't take the CAG report very seriously. I think, that's a bean counters report. There are obvious gaps in India's, the kind of procurement and the kind of defense preparedness we have. That's not hidden from anybody, but probably the situation is not even as dire as what the CAG report makes it out to be. But having said that, I think this 20,000 crore report which you're talking about, which your correspondent has come up with, I think at one level it's a good thing that, if there are some emergency shortfalls, you give the money so that those shortfalls can be made up. But it's also emblematic of a deeper malaise which has been afflicting India's defense preparedness for donkey's years now. And it's not just about UPA or NDA or what have you. It's just been, it's basically the Indian Assist Service or the Indian Administrative Service. You take your pick. They are so obstructive. They are such a disaster as far as defense management is concerned, that they are the biggest obstacles to any kind of a movement forward. But they've been that way
for a very long time. But when you're bracing for a possible conflict, that's the last time you want the army and the civilian administrative services to be in conflict. Final words, General Hasnain. 20,000 crore rupees being sanctioned, the Vice Chief being given extra emergency financial powers. Is this enough for India to take ammunition stockpile to an adequate level, according to you, General Hasnain?
Rahul, firstly, let me endorse every word which Mr. Sushant Sareen has just said. Absolutely spot on. I'm not so worried about the ammunition front. Even if you have got 10 days intense, we are not going to an intense war immediately, and this is something which can build up. 20,000 crores plus 40,000 crores, 60,000 crores is an adequate amount of money for that. I'm absolutely certain that this is not going to be spent on systems, on weapons to be bought, because weapons is not just a question of getting equipment. You have to bring in spares, you have to do training, you have to create repair facilities. So I'm not looking at equipment at all. It is basically the ammunition shortfall that we are looking at. And I think this kind of a thing which the government has done of deregulating the entire thing and giving the powers to the Vice Chief of the Army Staff is a good thing, is in the right direction. And I hope that this is going to teach us lessons for the future, that this is the kind of decentralization which is necessary to be a part of the system, so that the army can go ahead uninterrupted without the kind of obstacles with the civil-military relations invariably puts into its way.
Because it's not just about the message within, it's also the message going across the Himalayas to Beijing, where the Indian government preemptively and proactively taking steps, increasing ammunition supply, so that if, God forbid, China dares mess with us, we are fully prepared. As Arun Jaitley said when I interviewed him, this is not the India of 1962. The Chinese dragon, better beware of that.